Alright, let's go. Hello and welcome to what is going to be potentially the most downright disorganized, haphazard, schizophrenic video essay that you've ever seen. In this piece I want to cover labor injustices in the wine industry and how we as consumers can demand change and actually bring about change in the industry. In 2020, the global wine market was evaluated at $417 billion. That's more than double the GDP of Hungary. A great deal of our experience consuming and purchasing wine in the current epoch has been McDonaldized. Or if you're from the West Coast, that's Starbucksified. What do I mean by this? Well, a lot of the world's bulk, cheaper wine that we consume isn't created by an artisan in a dimly lit cellar toiling away behind a barrel. Truly, this is expected in today's neoliberal, capitalist, globalist order. Dominion over all resources, including labor, are controlled to the extent where uniform products can be created. Uniform, recognizable, and sometimes not all that spectacular. But this hegemonic structure was not always the case. A lot of modern winemaking techniques were discovered hundreds of years ago by the only people who had A, control over their land, unlike serfs, and B, plenty of free time. Monks. But who cares about monks? They've been dead for centuries. Now, we're going to transport ourselves away to the far-off lands of the liquor store.
Upon my travels, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, "'Tis some wine," I muttered. "That'll be all," quoth the cashier. "Only this, and nothing more."
But it wasn't that simple, right? You probably chose to buy that bottle of wine in particular because of its appearance. There's even a running joke in the industry that if there's an animal on the label, it'll sell. Price may play a big part in our purchasing habits, but another aspect of wine that's often overlooked is the story on the packaging and what it's trying to convey, from the label design to the message on the back. Or, better yet, you get a picture of where you, the consumer, fit into the picture. How you can enjoy this wine and be a part of the brand and sort of have a communicative taste. In a 2022 article, McGuire and her colleagues found that the most common messages in wineries' websites across several of the largest wine-producing countries was all the same. The most common message was that authentic provenance is derived from the commitment of a family, and therefore we have an assertion of the tangible, ethical, and inclusive values that a good family brings. It makes a complicated product where hundreds of hands may have touched what you end up getting into something a little bit more personal and tangible. This especially applies to recognizable, mass-produced, transnational stuff. In fact, I would go as far as saying that this style of storytelling in winemaking is a cheap cop-out from actually letting repressed voices from being heard. This is sorely lacking in the stories of the people who really made the wine. The countless workers who prune and trellis the grapevines, the cellar hands, the machine and lorry operators, and the underpaid assistant winemaker who has to pull overnighters. What we should really be doing is giving the voices to those who actually made the wine, even if those voices are disenfranchised. In the aforementioned article by McGuire, they had a look into South Africa. There, most people who work manual labor in wineries have done so for generations. For them, family is everything. Family is culture, values, history, authority, and the ability to mediate conflict. There's even a collective sense of family in the vineyard where mechanical solidarity takes hold. By sharing the voices of these people, you can perhaps give an outlet to creating solidarity and thus better labor conditions. All this talk of solidarity, well, you'd swear that there'd be lots of unions, right? Right? Throughout the 1990s, the company Gallo, based out of Sonoma, California, was the world's largest producer of wine. In 1994, vineyard workers officially formed a union represented by United Farm Workers. For 6 years, the union fought tooth and nail for recognition. It wasn't until 2000 that they were officially recognized by Gallo. With this came amazing gains for workers, like pay more than doubling, assurances of employment sustainability and continued employment, and a formal grievance process. As a vineyard hand, you are outside rain or shine. health or sickness, sometimes pulling 12 or 14-hour days for weeks on end just to make a very scant amount of money. That's why more often than not, these undesirable jobs are shifted onto temporary visa workers or immigrants from the global south who aren't able to negotiate or navigate the precarity of the work that they're assigned. In Canada, this equates to the majority of people in the sector being Mexican non-citizens through the temporary migrant farm worker program. Getting rid of that. Too bourgeois. These workers are often faced with appalling conditions, such as food insecurity, ramshackle housing that they can seldom leave, and long unprotected days out in the elements. As well as being seen as expendable and deportable, TMFP workers are excluded from many chartered freedoms in Canada. This includes voting, having access to family, and equitable health care. These are fundamental things that many of us take for granted. Okay, at this point you must be like, Lucas, all this must be illegal, and the Canadian government must be doing something to fix this, right? Right? And I would respond with, actually, a lot of these atrocious things that are happening are codified and enabled by law in Canada. That's right, it's totally okay to pay migrant workers less than minimum wage and work them overtime without recourse in Canada. This entire inequitable system that can be characterized as neocolonialism has been in place for generations now. In the past, this was the exploitation of non-Anglo-Saxons, orphans, POWs, and if you want me to get really specific, look no further than a case study of the Chinese working on the Pacific Railroad. Nowadays, the entire thing is, well, still predicated on temporarily moving individuals from the global south to the global north in order to be exploited. Notice how I said temporary. By making precarious working conditions tied to a visa in the global north, the only way some individuals have a possibility of climbing the socioeconomic ladder is through working in the global north. We call this border imperialism, basically hoarding wealth.
I like to imagine the bourgeois aristocracy sort of like that Frenchman in Monty Python's Holy Grail, hurling profanities down at the disenfranchised proletariat who are overstepping the line by asking for more than enough money to live in a crowded garage.
Going back to what I mentioned about overcrowded housing conditions, think about the pandemic and how those conditions were conducive for COVID-19 to spread across migrant worker communities. Adding on to this, linguistic barriers, inaccessibility to healthcare, and employers who often didn't care made migrants very vulnerable to the pandemic. You have to remember that the wine industry, especially in a boutique model, is still very heavily service-oriented too. When you go to visit a winery, you're often interacting with, well, a white, typically younger, sharp-dressed middle-class person. However, these workers have their own complex set of problems as well. These problems chiefly being emotional labor and the passion schema. Now, our buddy Gramsci would love this term. It's very reminiscent of hegemony. The proletariat is pervasively surveilled and controlled in their mind, heart, and body by the bourgeois. Emotional labor boils down to how workers have to augment their outward expression to satisfy their communicative niche in a position. In North America, that attitude is that the customer is always right. And this can put incredible onus on employees and middle management to perform and appease. This can cause emotional burnout and other problems for staff. Corporate culture can sometimes put a little bit too much emphasis on the superficial rigor of employees as opposed to genuine merit when looking to promote workers. This aspect, bearing the name of the aforementioned passion schema, ensures that only the most die-hard members reap rewards. You know, sort of like a cult. Anyway, with that all said and done, we need to find some sort of conclusion here. Dimitri, any ideas? Okay, I think I got one. As mentioned earlier, the true makeup of voices in the wine industry needs to be accounted for. The stories of people who have worked in vineyards are often richer and more raw than anything a marketing team could come up with. And we really shouldn't shy away from that. Principally, because these voices are more indicative of whether true, just, and sustainable practices have been taking place on a vineyard or a winery. This is promising, as studies show that consumers are becoming increasingly interested in whether the wines they purchase are environmentally certified or sound. I hope that this sort of moral compass can transfer also to the labor rights of the people working at the wineries. One of the ways this is being done right now as we speak is through winery cooperatives. More commonly, wholesale grape growers sell their grapes to wineries at whatever price the market puts it at. If they have a poor yield, their bottom line for an entire harvest can be horrendous. However, cooperatives allow grape growers and winemakers to be more hands-on with the entire process. Cooperative members have fixed incomes for their produce and a larger say in the operations of the winery. This reduces a lot of the precarity of this line of work, as well as increasing the ability for growers and field hands to actually own and have a say in the land instead of lease it. Co-ops encourage sharing of techniques, tools, and resources amongst community. I really cannot talk them up enough. If you want to support a winery cooperative, their popularity is increasing, and if you want to go to your local shop, I'm sure someone there would love to help you find one. If you go to BCL, literally today, they may have this in stock. I really enjoy this wine right here. In summation, buy from cooperatives, support unions, and educate yourself about labor conditions in the wine industry. So I hope that you learned about the wine industry's labor conditions and how we as consumers can demand change and bring about change, therefore fixing a lot of the problems that I mentioned. One more thing I want you to take home: never give a pigeon a hot dog. Take care.